Hello there. My review today is of a Cabernet Franc from the Central Otago region of New Zealand. So we're right down at towards the bottom of New Zealand's South Island, in an area that has relatively cool winters but has quite a continental climate. So there's good sunshine hours during the summer and very dry conditions generally. So the producer is a producer called Sato. This is La Ferme de Sato Sous 2021, and Bois, French for undergrowth, I understand. This is actually a Cabernet Franc, although the front label doesn't say so. I'm a little surprised by it not proclaiming that, but that appears to be their approach with their wines. Sato is a small but relatively new estate created by Yoshi and Kyoko Sato, originally from Japan. They're working together in banking and finance around the globe, working both in London and Japan, evidently. When in 2006, having acquired a love of wine, not just wine drinking, but clearly an interest in making it, they gave up their jobs in banking, headed south and went to Lincoln University, Christchurch, and studied viticulture and enology. Both Yoshi and Kyoko went on to work for Felton Road, a producer based in Bannockburn in the Central Otago wine region. Relatively quickly, Yoshi moved on from Road to work at Mount Edward, another well-renowned winery in the Bendigo sub-region of Central Otago. And in 2009, they started their own winemaking enterprise. At this stage, they weren't actually growing their own fruit. They were buying fruit from organic growers throughout the Central Otago region. In 2012, Yoshi made the decision to leave Mount Edward so that he could devote his time entirely to their own winemaking enterprises. In 2016, they started planting their own biodynamic vineyard. In 2018, Kyoko left Felton Road, but they're now both entirely committed to making their own estate wines. Their property is a 5-hectare property with 3.19 of those hectares planted to vines. It lies in the Pisa sub-region of Central Otago. And the soils here are alluvial with sand and silt loams, along with schist and quartz gravels. They have 0.3 hectares of Gamay planted, as well as that there's half a hectare of Chenin Blanc, 0.9 hectares of Chardonnay, and 1.3 hectares of Pinot Noir. Some of these are slightly unusual varieties, but the variety I find most interesting is their Cabernet Franc, which comprises the remaining 0.9 hectares of their vineyard. Their approaches are organic and biodynamic. They don't use pesticides, herbicides, fungicides or inorganic fertilizer. In the winery, their approach is very low input, and they've been influenced in this by natural wine producers that they've met and worked with in Burgundy and in Alsace. As I say, their approach is low in input. One would virtually say they were natural wine producers, but they do use tiny amounts of SO2, normally about 15 to 20 milligrams at most. This says that its SO2 level is 15 milligrams per litre, and that is an exceptionally low level of sulfur dioxide. And they allow fermentations to be initiated by the natural yeast flora that's come into the winery on the fruit. This tiny portion, remember 0.19 hectares, was all picked on the 24th of April in 2021. The fruit was destemmed, went into tank to ferment, and was on skins there for 26 days, evidently. Fermentation was allowed to commence with the natural yeast microflora that was present. So as I say, it either come into the winery on the fruit or was already present in the winery conducting other fermentations. I should have said yields were relatively low, although not minuscule. They managed to get 35 hectolitres per hectare off this, which would probably be about the yield that a good Cru Classé would be taking from its vine. The wine was allowed to age in old oak barrels for 17 months, so not so that it would get an influence of oak flavour and tannic structure, but more to allow the slow ingress of oxygen through the barrel staves to fix the tannins and the beautiful aromas in the wine over a period of barrel aging. And when the wine finally went into bottle, it went there unfined and unfiltered. So very much the approach here is to try and be very natural with the winemaking, very much to allow the wines to make themselves. So let's have a look at it, shall we? My first impression is of a wine with a lovely deep dark colour. That is virtually opaque. I'm not sure I can make out the stem of the glass as I look down through that. At the rim, there's really quite a vivid purple note. The core of the wine, actually almost from the rim itself, it is a more inky dark. I mean, it's not totally opaque. It may lose a little bit of colour to the rim, but basically that's a deep, dark, intense colour there. Swirling it, there appears to be a little bit of retained CO2, which may well be intentional to help preserve a wine that has quite low SO2 levels. As I swirl it, the wine has 13.9% alcohol, and it's clinging to the glass, and it's very slowly forming some quite noticeable tears. There's good viscosity there. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? There's quite a fine, lifted red fruit aroma, almost a floral note. But then there's a slightly chalky nature to the aromas. There's certainly no sort of oak spices to the wine. It's fresh, it's providing dark fruit, but with an almost sort of lifted violet perfume. There is a real vivacity there just to the aromas. So let's have a taste. The wine's got a really energising freshness to it. There's a fine grained structure, but it's not astringent. It's not got a sort of drying, oaky edge to it there. There's a chalky texture, but then following that there's a sort of a red fruit suppleness. There's sort of a plum skin note to it, almost that sort of velvety texture. With that lovely mouth-watering freshness. Because of the lovely freshness, I'm sort of looking for what I might classically get with a Bordeaux in terms of leafy hint. There's not that sort of slightly herbaceous note. There actually is a lovely depth of that smooth. I want to talk about plummy fruit, but it's lively, front of mouth, red plum through to more black plum, damson, that sort of note. But the acidity is keeping the finish lively, and I'm still looking for that slightly herbaceous note that I'd expect with a Bordeaux Cabernet Franc, and it's not showing. And yet the wine also hasn't got that sort of rich, high ripeness note that can sometimes make Cabernet Franc quite licoricey. It's a wine with a good structure. The alcohol appears to be in reasonable balance. It's giving warmth and roundness to the back palate. But actually what's impressive is the depth and the purity of the fruit here. I did try this earlier when I opened it, and it has taken a while to open out. But I'm so glad I gave it a bit more time and came back to it, because there really is a beautiful definition and density to the fruit at the finish there. I think this wine is typical of the sort of quality you get from the attention to detail that the Satos put into making their wines. I think it's a wine that's relatively young. I think you could certainly come back to this over the next 7 to 10 years and see that it's continuing to improve. Its acidity is lovely, its overall balance is lovely, and its tannins have a real presence without dominating the lovely ripe red to black fruit that's in here. I've really enjoyed the wine. I had a look to see if we had a Wine Search aggregated critic score for this. We don't as yet for this vintage. Again, I would hope that this would score somewhere in the lower 90s, probably 93, 92 or so. I've been surprisingly impressed with it. I didn't know quite what to expect for a Cabernet Franc from Central Otago. It doesn't perhaps have the angularity or the astringency that I sometimes associate with the wine when you see it from Bordeaux, and actually I think that's a virtue. I think the harmony in this wine is very impressive. So I think this wine, just to maintain some of the freshness and perfume that you'd expect from Cabernet Franc without its angularity, the harmony that it shows is very attractive. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, we'd be really grateful if you'd press the like button. If you'd like to watch more of these videos, it would be amazing if you could sign up and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that way you can set yourself an alert and make sure you're notified every time we publish a new video. Equally, if you have friends who you think might like to watch it, we would really appreciate you passing the video on to them. That endorsement would be fantastic, and we thank you for it. I will, of course, leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so that you can follow that. You can see if it's available near you. Surprisingly, for a wine with such tiny production, and in fact less than 1,200 bottles of this wine were produced. They say 1,176 bottles in total. Sato's wines are actually relatively well distributed. I've certainly seen listings for them in the UK, Taiwan and Japan. But as well as pricing and availability on those pages, you can also use the tabs there to get to information about the producer, the region, the grape variety, the winemaking. There are tabs to take you to critics' reviews, to users' reviews, to any awards the wine's won. You can see the wine's price history, and also there's a vintage comparison section there as well. So hopefully that's providing you with any information you might ever need if you're thinking about purchasing a wine. If you have any comments you'd like to leave, please pop those in the comments box below. We'd be really interested in your feedback on the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to that. Most importantly, however, do please try and take the time and come and join us for another video tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.